Hi, everyone. My name is Marjorie McPike. I am the host of the CPA Lady podcast. I am located in Southern California. I am a CPA practicing public accounting for small businesses, helping them with their accounting, taxes, tax planning, tax strategies, and of course, helping them to understand and pass on generational wealth. So today on the podcast, we have Germeen Guillaume. She is out of New York and she goes by the Visionary Accountant on Instagram. So Germeen, can you just introduce yourself, kind of tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, so as mentioned, my name is Germeen Guillaume. I am the CEO of Visionary Accounting Group. We specifically work with nonprofit organizations. We help them to migrate to cloud accounting and streamline their day-to-day financial operations. I got into the nonprofit space a couple of years ago, really random. I was on maternity leave. And a family friend knew an organization that had just lost their CFO and their controller. And so they were looking for some interim financial leadership. I stepped in and the rest was history. Prior to that, I spent most of my time actually in the audit space. So auditing for public accounting. Then I went internal into the banking industry and spent some time doing like trust audits, compliance, anti-money laundering work. And so really interesting background, but that ultimately led me to running my own boutique firm. So here I am.
Awesome. And you focus primarily on nonprofits.
Yes, I do. So initially I started, kind of typically like everyone, kind of like working with whoever needed assistance. But after I took that interim controller role, it just really, I felt very fulfilled and deeply touched working with an organization who was supporting and doing great work in the community, and also being able to see the inner workings of their fiscal function and how much help they needed. I'm like, I know that there are other organizations that need the same help. Nonprofits tend to be cash strapped. So sometimes building out this full-blown accounting department is just not within their budget. And so we seek to provide the gap between making sure that they have access to, the strong financial information that they need, but at a more affordable cost.
More affordable price, right? That's good, because a lot of nonprofits, like you said, they are cash strapped. So did you find that there were a lot of nonprofits that were starting up in 2020?
In 2020, I wouldn't say starting up. The funny thing is that I think people don't realize starting nonprofits, in my opinion, at least, is very difficult compared to starting like a business, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I wouldn't say that I found that there were a lot more starting up in 2020. What I will say is that the organizations that did exist found themselves really doubling down on whether they were truly committed to their mission, their impact, and what managing their organization really looked like during and post-pandemic.
Okay. That's good. So what do you find, because we're all about accounting and systems, and what do you find when you're working with these clients? Do you find their books to be in order? Do you find them to, well, of course, they're coming to you because they need assistance, but.
So I find that nonprofits tend to work with like what I like to call like legacy systems and processes. And so, especially for the ones that have been around for years and years. And so a lot of times it's a lot of doing what we've been doing just because we've always done it. And so, right. I mean, of course, it's 2021, right? So technology has come a really long way. And so what I find is that things are very manual and paper-based, and there could be a lot of improvement to their actual accounting process to make it more efficient, save them money, right? Because the other thing is I think that they could actually, a lot of the organizations who probably think that they're so broken and they need all of this additional help, if they implemented the right systems, implemented better tech solutions, they may not need that full-blown team that they thinking they're needing, because things are so like manual and paper-based. And so if you follow me on social, I beat this drum all the time where I'm like, get over to the cloud, implement tech solutions, become more tech forward, because honestly, that's also the way the world is moving, if not already, especially since things have kind of, turned upside down via the pandemic.
Right, the new normal, right? So
yep,
what
exactly.
type of, you talk about cloud and tech solutions. So what type of systems do you recommend for your clients to to migrate to. And I ask that because a lot of times the systems are the same, whether it's a nonprofit or a for-profit, but there are going to be some tweaks in, you know, your chart of accounts and your reporting and things like that.
Absolutely. Oh, and again, just piggybacking off what you said, so this would be, you know, beneficial to small businesses too, because I'm an advocate of getting off of the spreadsheet. Like tracking things manually just leaves you open to a lot of error. And usually when you're tracking things manually, you're not keeping up with it. And so at the very least, I recommend that my clients get on a cloud-based accounting tool. The size of the organizations I work with usually range from anywhere. They're managing budgets anywhere from about like 300K to 3 million. And so QuickBooks Online works for them. But there are other accounting solutions out there that have cloud-based versions. And so at the very least, I suggest getting over and managing your accounting on the cloud. But then we also go through building what I like to call their tech stack. So depending on, you know, how they're managing donors. So is there a tool that integrates with QuickBooks Online? Bill pay, we're looking at bill.com, right? Is there ways? So just, you know, depending on the nature of the organization, do they manage a lot of expenses? Are there a lot of different programs that they're managing? So then maybe we need to look at an expense management tool that integrates with QuickBooks. But we're all about creating an ecosystem for them, essentially, that like pretty much operates as their back office, but as best we can, making sure that these tools talk to each other. So it makes it easier for them. So they're not kind of like managing a bunch of different things that are all over the place and separate, but kind of integrating one ecosystem that they can follow. So that's why we say a streamlined process. So making sure that whatever tech we implement actually talks to each other, is streamlined, and really makes sense for the organization. I'm definitely not into just implementing things like just because.
Just because, right. Okay, I like that, because you find a lot of, you know, the new normal is excuse me, cloud-based automations. You know, automations are huge. It's like, how can we automate this so that we don't have to take the extra step? So I like that you integrate a lot of that.
Yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with automation though, because at least in my industry, in the nonprofit space, yes, you can automate, but there is a lot of, I would say there is a lot of strategic planning and advising that needs to happen that you cannot automate. So while we may be able to automate some tasks and things, I think we have to get away from thinking that this automation is going to completely serve as an all-in-one tool to like manage this function, right? There still has to be someone who's setting the plan, implementing internal controls, making sure they're being followed, right? And just making sure also that, you know, who's having discussions around the financial health of the organization and making sure, you know, maintaining grant compliance and things like that. There are just certain things that a tool can't do for you. That's why I said where you can, you want to use it to support your process, but it's not going to be your entire process.
Entire process, right. I like that. I know someone mentioned that even with QuickBooks Online, it's like how you can automatically import your transactions, right? Or set up rules. It's like, but you don't want to always just tell it to automatically do that, because there may be something that's a little bit different that you at least need to review it. So
that's what I'm about to say, or you don't want to just have it going in and then you're never looking at it, right? So yes, you use it to move things quicker, but then you absolutely should be reviewing to make sure, you know, it's correct, right? And then,
right.
You know, if there's a month where you have a new transaction, it's not going to know what to do. So you have to make sure that you are going in and you're still doing that review.
Okay, awesome. I love it. Okay, so you mentioned grants, because I know that on Instagram, everybody's on social media, but there's a lot of information about how to apply for grants, how to get grants. It's like, so can you just kind of give some background on not so much the grant, well, maybe not the granting or requesting process, but maybe the reporting, the compliance that you need to do, things that people need to think about if they're getting, you know, if they're receiving grants?
Yes, and I'm so glad you said that, because I think so many people focus on how can I get the money, and few people think about, okay, what happens after I get this
After I get the
money?
money, right.
So yeah, and so most of the organizations that I work with actually receive government grants. And so in my opinion, those have an added level of like scrutiny and compliance. And so if you are an organization or even a business that are wanting to contract with the government, wanting to get these government grants, you absolutely have to have a solid bookkeeping and accounting function. So from the nonprofit standpoint, a lot of these agencies actually will require periodic financial reports. So whether like monthly or quarterly usually, but it really is having to be detailed about like how you spent the funds that you were given, and then providing support on those expenditures, and then also being able to make sure that you're explaining and going back and looking back as to how that compares to what the budget was that was set, to whatever the requirements were dictated in the beginning of the grant relationship. And then also just the honestly the accounting and bookkeeping around it. So a lot of these grants will have what's called like allowable versus unallowable expenses. So just because you spent money on a certain grant doesn't mean you can actually get reimbursed for it. And so it's really important to be very detailed and nuanced, because I've experienced where we're invoicing for these grants, invoices are getting pushed back because we're including expenses that may not have been allowable. Or, or I've seen where organizations were invoicing for just all expenses that related to that program and got paid out. And then when a review was done on the back end from the grantor's auditor, that organization then had to pay back those funds. So it's really important to just be very detailed in your reporting, especially because most organizations are managing multiple grants, right? So you want to make sure that you have a specific process to how you're managing grant compliance, but then also how you're managing each individual grant's spending.
Wow, that was good. Because so many people don't think about that. It's just, hey, I can get this money and I can do this, or I can get this money and I can do that. But what do you need to do? And even the auditing, portion that you mentioned, or the additional compliance, right? That's
Yeah, because
huge.
normally if you're taking government grants, an audit is inevitable. And it's not because you're doing something wrong, that's just a part of their process. And so if you are not keeping good books, good records, you're not going to have a good audit. And then what ends up happening is that those grants won't be renewed. And that means you miss out on funding. And then it becomes a trickle effect. And so you just want to have, you want to make sure that you have good habits around how you're managing your organizations or your business's finances, so that when these things kind of come up, it's not like a fire drill.
Okay. So let's talk about good habits.
Yes, yes.
Good habits. What are some of those good habits that an organization or a small business should implement? I know we talked about the QuickBooks and the system, but let's talk about good habits.
Yeah, so one, making sure at the beginning of the year you're operating or running your business with an annual budget, right? So giving some thought as to what you're expecting to bring in, what you're expecting to send, and then making sure that you're reviewing that at least monthly. I find sometimes people set budgets and then they never look at them again. From a nonprofit standpoint, you absolutely need a budget. Like, you shouldn't be operating without one. The second thing is implementing a close process. So we close the books monthly. I'm hearing, and I didn't know this was a thing, but I've been hearing often that people or organizations are closing annually and not monthly. And I think that that is a huge no-no. So I am of the belief that you need to be doing a full review on your books every month, looking for outliers. Nonprofits are, especially because they're largely subject to fraud. And so you want to make sure that you're looking for anything that should not be, right? And also, even as a business, if something is going wrong and you see like you're out here spending money on Facebook ads promoting a product no one's buying, then maybe you need to can that product, or maybe you need to in that service. So it's important to make sure that you're implementing this monthly check-in on your finances so that it can dictate your decisions, right? So if you're planning, you're making decisions, you're determining what to market and campaign, it should be based in data. And that data is going to be those numbers. And so by implementing that habit of at least monthly checking in on your finances, reconciling, closing the books, you can bet that you have a better handle, on your, on your finances. And so I think those are the top two. And then when you're doing that review monthly, that's when you should be doing that budget to actual. So bring that budget back up and compare it to your actual, so you can see what are the outliers, what red flags are coming up for you, Or is there a surplus? Like, you might have an influx of cash that you didn't even know, and so now what do you do? What do you do with that extra money? Do you build a reserve? Do you put it back into a marketing campaign that's really working? You're not going to know the answer to these things unless you're actually reviewing and then making decisions based on that data.
Very good. Very good. So it all kind of goes like, it's the same thing. It's the budget, evaluating what happened, and then making adjustments. Same with like personal finance, right? It's all about the budget. So you just know what you have to work with. Right. Okay, so you mentioned something about a surplus. And I had a question, because a lot of times people say nonprofit organization. So with a nonprofit organization, it's not, the goal of it is not to make a profit, right? So can you explain that part of it?
Yes, I am so glad that you said that. So the goal is not to make a profit, but that does not mean you cannot make a profit. I think there's a lot of misinformation, and nonprofit is a tax status. You want to make a profit because that means that you can then reinvest that income, that funding back into the organization. The difference between a nonprofit and a business is that if there's a profit in a business, that money can go to the owner, they can take a draw. In a nonprofit, there is no owner, right? So that money cannot go to a person per se. But the problem with so many organizations who are operating in a deficit, those are the ones that tend to be cash strapped. They tend to be scraping by, and they tend to not be able to have even enough funding to have operating reserves, because they're usually either making just enough or sometimes they're in a deficit. And so while the goal isn't to have all of this money left over, it's absolutely okay if you make a profit, because that just shows that it shows that you're operating well, and now you have more money to make more impact, to maybe invest in more staff. So if you're operating a surplus, you want to start thinking about what can you do with those additional funds.
Okay. And a lot of people just think, oh, I don't have to make a profit. I can just kind of, spend all the money, which in some organizations is like that. They kind of make sure that it's like all the budget, all what's been received has gone out. But I guess it's important too to distinguish between program and general expenses. Right.
Absolutely. Because depending on, just like we were talking about grants. So for some grants, you don't spend all the money. They might think you don't need all of that money. So the next year the grant is smaller. So like in that case, it's like, we need to spend all of these funds, right? So it's context. So making sure that when you're having these planning and strategy meetings, differentiating between what kind of approach you need to take for maybe the different funding sources, right? Somewhere you may want to max out, somewhere you may not.
Right. That's a good point. Very good. Very good. Okay. So do you find, because the generational wealth piece of it, so do you find a lot of individuals leaving monies to nonprofit organizations that you work with?
Not so much, but that's because mainly the organizations I work with are government funded, but I know that organizations that tend to be heavily funded by like individual donations, those organizations I find tend to, because sometimes they're a lot more closer to the community, those tend to be the organizations that may end up like in someone's will, someone who has a really close connection to the organization, or a deep, if they connect to the mission. A lot of times it's usually because it's something that they experience personally, then I do see that they will then put that organization in their will.
Okay. And that's a good way to pass on generational wealth. That's something that I always like to bring up, because you can leave, a portion of your money to a charitable organization, or you can actually set up a trust that where, say the proceeds of the trust, the income that the trust generates for a period of years, you can leave to a nonprofit organization, and the trust gets a charitable contribution deduction. So, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me, okay, so I have so many questions. So so many questions. So tell me something that's just one of your passions. What are you really passionate about when it comes to nonprofits and the systems? But just a tip, a trick, something that we can give our listeners.
Well, as far as what I'm most passionate about really is the education piece, because I think that there is this notion that when people hear nonprofit, they automatically equate that with like scarcity, with the lack. And I want people to know that one, you can work for a nonprofit and make a decent living. I've worked as a controller, and I mean, I was making a decent salary. And so I know that they do pay, depending on the size, of course, and the operations. But I think there's this notion that if you want to work for pennies, then you work for a nonprofit organization. And that just really is not the case. And I had that mindset too before I actually got into the space. So that's definitely one misconception that I wanna bust. But then also understanding that, because I see so much of the conversation is around like fundraising and program management, but not understanding that having proper and strong financial management is the backbone for what it is that you do on the front end. And so I really want people to pay more attention and invest more in their financial infrastructure. And again, at the very least, making sure that you actually have a system for how you're managing and tracking your income. It's important for everyone that's running an operation, but it's really important for nonprofits because you're heavily regulated. And if ever it is determined that you're mishandling, you can lose your certification. There's just a lot more implications. And so you want to, at the very least, you want to make sure that you are maintaining compliance. And so I get a lot of fuel by doing a lot of talking, by educating. I love video content. So if you follow me on social media, I go live all the time, but it's based off of questions that I'm asked, topics that I know are important. And now having worked with, I don't know, a number of organizations and seeing what their internal operations look like, educating the masses on, do's and don'ts, best practices, and things that they need to implement in order to build a financially sound organization.
Awesome. Awesome. Um, awesome. Okay, so someone asked me a question, and a couple of questions. So I'm just going to throw them out there regarding nonprofits. So this
Okay.
person, so they started a nonprofit, and they were putting a lot of their personal money into the nonprofit, trying to get it up and going. And their question was, how do I get to write that off on my taxes? So I know the answer that I gave them. I want to see what you're going to say. So
So technically, that's not considered a charitable contribution or donation. I think people miss or confuse the fact that when they start an organization, so when you start a business, how you get those startup costs that you get to write off, it is not the same for a nonprofit organization. And that's why I always say, if you're starting an organization and you're unsure of what your funding plan is going to be, take a step back and ensure, because you're going to put a lot of money up front and you won't see a lot of that come back, right? At least as far as it relates to those initial investments. And so I would definitely challenge you to think about what your long-term plan is, because unfortunately you don't get the same deduction on the nonprofit side that you would if you were starting a business and putting in all of those startup costs.
so even if it's already like established as a nonprofit,
What do you
so
mean?
like they're starting the nonprofit, or they started the nonprofit, and so they're putting in money, they're giving the nonprofit money, or they're putting money into it. So it wouldn't be a matter of just recording the revenue on the nonprofit side and then them taking the deduction on their side, or is there where you have to wait until the nonprofit is actually fully, because I know you have to wait until it's actually considered an exempt organization, it's been accepted by the IRS, right? But so all of the startup costs are just kind of like gone by the wayside for a
I
nonprofit.
don't know if I would say gone by the wayside, but there isn't, as far as I know, because again, I don't work with startups and I'm not a CPA, but
Mhm.
if, as far as I know, is those initial investments, especially if you're not certified, like you mentioned, then no, like it's really like you kind of just considered like you making a donation to the organization, but you don't get to write that off.
You don't get to write that off. Okay, interesting. Okay, I had to, I have to dig into that one a little bit deeper.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. Um, the type of clients that you work with, you mentioned 300K to 3 million. Do you work with smaller clients as well, or clients with lower revenues, I should say?
So it really depends, because what I find is that I find that smaller organizations sometimes will think that they need this robust accounting and bookkeeping, and they don't need it yet. And because nonprofits tend to be cash strapped, I am a firm believer in preserving. And so you want to, if you're going to invest, so for example, like my offers are for the most part retainers. And so that means this is an ongoing cost. And so the reason why I prefer to work with larger organizations is, one, because they can afford it, but then also they need it. Some of the smaller organizations, their volume of transactions are much lower, and they don't have robust operations to where they need someone independently managing that. So at that level, I would just suggest, of course, making sure that you have someone who's going to prepare, a CPA who's going to prepare your 990 if you're above the EZ, the 50K for filing an EZ. But as far as ongoing bookkeeping and accounting, I definitely depends. But I think I've worked with organizations. I think the smallest one had a budget of 250K, but even that organization, it's a very basic bookkeeping because the volume of transactions, again, was just super low.
Okay. Do you assist with audit prep as well, or do you kind of outsource that?
No, I do, because audit has a special place
in your heart,
in my heart, because I'm muted by accident. I come from an audit background. I spent the bulk of my corporate career was in audit, both public and private. And so I think that I bring something unique to the nonprofit space, having had that background. And so I absolutely help with audit prep. Usually the organizations that we work with, at the very least, are required to get annual audits. But also, if you're getting government funding, they can also come in and audit you. And that's usually the difference. That's usually ad hoc. So a lot of times you don't even know when they're going to come in. And so we are very, very big on keeping our clients audit ready, we like to say, so that if at any point someone came in, it isn't like a matter to kind of figure out how do we get things in order.
Right. Okay. And you can be an employee of your own nonprofit, right? I think I had someone ask me that. You can be like an employee of your own nonprofit. So even if it's
yeah.
Because it's a totally separate entity.
Yes. Officially though, because I find that organizations are doing this thing where they are like giving themselves like stipends or paying themselves as like contractors. There is a very huge difference, of course, between being a contractor and an employee. So if you're asking, can you be an employee of your organization? Yes, but that means that you are getting paid on payroll. You are getting paid on payroll.
So what's the difference with the stipend? Because I do know someone that has a nonprofit organization, and they said that they're just kind of taking a stipend per month.
So that's going to be very much dependent on the state. What I find is that you have to be careful with taking a stipend, because in some states, they still require you to account for the FICA, so certain state and local taxes. So you can take the stipend, but normally, as people take stipend, they're technically taking it without taxes, right? So kind of just paying themselves a set amount. And so in some states, though, it's actually required, though, that you pay at least state and local taxes on that stipend. So you would need to be very clear on what your state requirements are.
Have you had, so like a nonprofit organization, kind of, generally a nonprofit organization, it's for a reason, right? They have a mission where they're helping, like the community or society or something like that, right? I had someone that wanted to purchase property as a nonprofit. And then, well, and this is probably like a tax question too, so.
So are they asking if you can do that?
Yeah.
So you can, but of course you want to check the specifics. But a lot of the organizations that I work with are actually in what's called like supportive services. And so some of them actually own the buildings that that are pretty much like housing. So homeless shelters, housing that supports like individuals that are living like with HIV/AIDS. And so some of them, they're either contracted with the city, and this maybe the city owns them, but the nonprofit manages it. But then I've worked with organizations also that have outright purchased the property. But again, it's owned by the nonprofit, not the individual leader or founder.
I like the idea of a nonprofit owning a building for that purpose of helping individuals.
Yeah, and it's actually quite common. When I got in this space, I realized there was a lot of organizations that were specifically doing supportive services, and that's all around affordable housing, making sure that, like domestic violence shelters, homeless shelters. So all around individuals who might be suffering or dealing with different things and providing them with shelter.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. So what other projects do you have going on besides, your business? You're the CEO of your business, you're on Instagram, going live,
Yes.
educating the people.
I'm glad you asked. Now, so for the past 3 years, we've mainly been focused on that retainer work and clients who want to outsource their accounting to us. But in the last year, like a little bit before the pandemic, and then it heightened during the pandemic, we had begun to take on projects that were where we were working with nonprofits who had either bookkeepers or teams, but they weren't prepared to go remote or work virtually, like when we had our quarantine stay-at-home orders, or they were able to get themselves over, but they realized that they are really struggling to have a streamlined and easy process. Well, I won't say easy, but like a process with ease as it relates to now managing like their accounting operations virtually. And some of them, I think, recognize that there's benefits in staying remote. And so I'm actually in the middle of launching the alpha version of what we're calling the Do Good Accounting Program, where we're teaching nonprofit organizations who have a current bookkeeper or accounting team how to manage their accounting operations virtually. So what does that look like migrating over to the cloud? What does it look like implementing security measures, internal controls? So we focus less on like financial concepts and more around the systems and processes that they need to manage their financial operations virtually. And so I think a lot more organizations realize now how important it is, because even for those returning back to the office, certain things are just easier when you can access them via the internet.
Right.
And so I'm really advocating for more nonprofits to take advantage of this option. And so as such, we're now running a program that will teach them how to do that. And so it's like my baby. I'm really excited about it. The first cohort starts in July. And I think it'll be great because there are some organizations that don't want to outsource, but they recognize that they have gaps in their current process. And they may not just want someone to come in and diagnose the problem. They want someone to come in, hold your hand, and show you how you can actually implement the proper things. And then they go and manage it on their own.
Okay. And I have to ask this question. Are more of your clients, what percentage of your clients are African American compared to other nationalities?
So all of my clients, all of the nonprofits I work with right now are minority led.
Okay.
Black specifically. But I will work with, of course, other organizations, but it does, I won't lie, I'm Black, right? And so, it holds a special place in my heart to work with organizations that are Black led because we are less funded. And so a lot of times we experience a lot more strain and stress as it relates to trying to keep a nonprofit up and running. And so I'm really huge on making sure we have our stuff in order so that when we go to apply for these grants or when we're looking for funding, we have the total package already prepared. And so, honestly, I can call it if you deny us for something that doesn't really exist, if you know what I mean.
Mhm. I love that. I love that. Because it's all about educating us, because we don't always have the information, and a lot of things that I do, it's all for that reason, because we need the information that's being passed around in other circles, right? In
Hmm.
order to allow us to have the seat at the table, or to have the fair advantage, right?
Absolutely, especially because, there was a lot of, talk about, organizations who are they're helping, or they're within the Black community, but the boards are not diverse, right? The boards are made up of, people that don't look like us. And so it's like, how can you really run and speak to the heart of this mission of this organization if you're not close to it, or if
Right.
or if that board is not diverse, so you're sitting next to someone who understands what that plight looks like, and
Right.
so I find that the same way the murder of George Floyd called a lot of people to the carpet, it called a lot of people in the philanthropy space also to carpet, and it started to highlight how philanthropy can be very white.
Right. 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 That is so awesome. Yes, we have to get the information to us, right? And help us, because we do, as a people, we have a very good work ethic, you know, and we're very resilient, and we persevere. But a lot of times we don't have that other information in order to help us to go to the next level.
Right, because sometimes you can work as hard as you want, but if you don't have the connection, you don't have the relationship, it's like working hard, but on that same hamster
On
wheel
that same
and not
hamster
going
wheel.
anywhere. And so you're absolutely right about that.
Wow, that is so cool. So I do have some friends, or some clients. I know a couple people that have started nonprofit organizations, that may need some assistance getting their systems in place. Um, I kind of help, but sometimes, different seasons take on.
No, I listen, I totally get it. I know, send them my way, if I can. And again, like what I like to do, if an organization is not in a position to work with us, or if we realize that it won't be a great fit, I'm all about though making sure that's why I said that we take a very education heavy approach here, so that we can make sure at the very least you learn something here, you get some resources. So even if we're not your accountant, when you come to my little corner of the internet, you're absolutely going to leave knowing something new, learning something you didn't. And I'm one of those that I try to be in touch. So if you send me a DM, I'm going to answer, I'm going to respond, and so I'm not too big for those types of things, because I'm really big on us being educated in this space,
Mhm.
and going after what is ours.
Right, right, right. And getting to the heart of the issue. So the important things. The finances are important, but we don't want anything to come and trip us up so that we can't do what the mission is of the organization.
Exactly. And it's like, you have to care about the mission and the money. You
Mhm.
shouldn't, because what I find, I'm like, it's like people are like, they're so focused on the mission, but I'm like, no money means you can't fund your programs, means you can't pay people. Cause right, that's the
Right.
other thing. Like, you need staff, you need people who are going to actually work, and put forth these programs. And so I want more people to stop thinking that when you're in the nonprofit space, money is like, taboo. Like, we don't, like not talking about it. We want the funding because that means
Right, right, right. So the nonprofits get the funding, people who contribute to it, if they're, if that's the type of organization it is, they get the charitable contribution deduction on their tax return.
yes. So individual contributors, and I think it's if you donate more than 250, you should be getting like a donor acknowledgement letter from the organization. And
Mhm.
so, and I'm not the tax CPA, but I know that there's some additional deduction now with the $300, but I think
Right,
this is
right.
something that came up via the pandemic. And
The
so
pandemic. Mhm.
I'm hoping it
Mhm.
stays, but now you get to claim it whether or not you itemize or not.
Right, right. So at least the 300, which is good, which is good. Okay, cool. So
Yeah.
we talked about the cloud, and I have to ask, what system do you recommend for storing files? And I know you can't be you can't endorse anything, but like what?
Well, I have not. Let me say. So I've worked with 3 different tools. Personally, the back end of our business, we use Google Drive, but the business version. But Dropbox has a business, because that's the other thing, we want to not be mixing personal and business, right? So
Right.
Dropbox has it where you can have a business account, and then there's also something called Smart Vault,
Oh, I've heard
which
about
is also, yep, which is also document storage, password protected, encrypted, and so you're sharing files in a safe way.
that. Right. Okay. Um, do you have like referral codes? Any special thing that we can give to our listeners?
I don't have I don't have a referral code, but I do have, and I mean, this may only be helpful to nonprofit organizations, but I do have a free training that I can send you the link for. Really talks about the basics of financial management. And so that may be helpful for your listeners, because again, there are a lot of similarities with how you should run a business and a nonprofit. I'm really big on us. I tell my clients, like, you're not a for-profit business, but there's a lot of things that we can take from the for-profit world as far as how we should be running.
Running,
And
right.
so really big on that.
Okay, awesome. Yes, I would love the free training.
Okay, so I will definitely send that over to
Yeah, I have a couple, like I said, a couple clients that are nonprofits, and I think I'm like 3 or 4. And I'm a part of an organization. I don't. It's called the Alliance of Black Women Accountants, and we have some nonprofit, CPAs that are in there that may have clients that they can forward the information to. So as long as you don't mind me forwarding it out, I would.
Oh,
get
yeah,
it
yeah,
out
yeah.
there.
No. Okay, nope. I will absolutely share. Are you also a part of NABA, or have you been a part of NABA?
I am not a part of NABA, and that's primarily because I'm like an hour and a half from Los Angeles, which is where the nearest chapter was. So,
Oh,
everything
okay,
was in the
okay,
evening
okay.
time. So that part of that is the reason why we formed. So I'm a founding member of the Alliance of Black Women Accountants. And
Oh, nice. Okay.
so that's part of the
Gotcha.
reasons why
Okay.
we formed our organizations, because we're all here, and to get to there, to LA, it's kind of challenging. So we started in
Nope,
20,
makes perfect sense.
right. So we started in 2015. We're up to like 50 members now. And we're just looking forward to doing a lot of great things. Another organization that I'm working on, I need to send in my membership
Mhm.
application, is the National Society of Black CPAs. So that's a new organization that's
Oh, I
nationwide.
think I
Mhm.
follow them on Instagram.
Yes, they're doing great things. I'm always referring them, CPAs or CPA candidates, or someone that's wanting to find out about being a CPA. I'm always referring them to their organization, because they just
Mhm.
have this major push right now to get Blacks licensed as a CPA. So, they have the funding,
I
they
love it.
really good funding. So it's like, let's take advantage of it. Let's not try to, we're here to support you, but they
See,
have the funding,
absolutely.
right? So we all.
Absolutely. But see, that's the power of a network, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, so we all work together to get people to the next level. So I love it. I love it, love it. Okay, so yes, please send me the free training. I will definitely put it out there. I'm big on networking and sharing information. I have another friend that she does accounting for nonprofit organizations, so I'll definitely send it to her.
Mhm.
And maybe you guys can connect. She has another podcast. So yeah, it's just good things. So I'm happy that we had this chance to sit down and talk. I appreciate the
Yes, me
information that
too.
that we can
Great
share.
conversation.
Mhm.
Now saying great conversation. I mean, I can talk about these things all day long. So
Yes, yes. So I'm like, yeah, if you have something else you want to share, please share it with us before we sign off, because I love it. I love it.
no, I mean, I think I covered enough. I always tell people I don't want to overwhelm you with too much, but yes, I think that it's super important to know that any solid, thriving organization is going to be supported or backed by having a strong financial management process, and having, being fiscally sound. And so, if nothing else, the same attention that you give to your mission, make sure that you're also giving that attention to your money management.
Yes. Yes. I'm gonna quote that one. Same attention that you give to your mission, give to your money manager. Okay. Okay. So my final question is expenses for a nonprofit. Do you recommend documenting the same way? Should there be extra documentation? I know you mentioned something about like grants and stuff, but if you could just touch on that really quick.
Yeah, so it's a little bit, I would say there are a lot of similarities from the fact that you want to make sure that you're, of course, tracking all of your expenses, making sure that they're categorized correctly. But the additional step with nonprofits that you have to make sure that you are considering the class. And so whether it is a program, admin, or fundraising expense, so you want to go the extra step of making sure that transactions are classified in the appropriate space, so that also too for budgeting purposes for 990 reasons, any user of your financial statements can tell where you're spending, like what area you're spending money in the most or the least.
Okay. Okay. And then do you work with just clients in New York, or do you work with clients nationwide?
That is the beauty of virtual accounting. So I work with clients nationwide. Oddly enough, only about two of my clients are actually local.
Really?
Yeah, most are located elsewhere.
Elsewhere.
Mhm.
Awesome. Awesome. But with modern technology, you're able to do that and still have a good relationship and service them.
Absolutely. I mean, now you have Zoom and all these things. I mean, I know people have Zoom fatigue just given the last year, but we've been using these tools prior to the pandemic.
Right. Oh, wow. That's awesome. So you've been doing the virtual cloud-based even before 2020. You've
Yeah,
always been.
I've always been virtual.
Wow. That's awesome. So when 2020 came in, you already knew what to do. You're
Yeah,
like, this
yeah.
is normal.
The challenge was more so working with organizations who had never worked with someone virtual, right? So I witnessed or experienced a lot of hesitation with wanting to like either move to the cloud or wanting to work with someone who was mainly virtual. So even that, I've realized I've had to do a lot of education on what it looks like to engage with like an accounting firm or a consultant that is virtual versus in-house. And I think too, people don't realize, but this opens you up, whether it's a business organization, to more talent. You can increase your talent pool if you are willing to work with remote workers.
Right, right. You can. And you find a lot of people are adapting and they like working remotely better than driving into the
Yeah,
office.
it's a new normal. So the
Mhm.
future of work is absolutely changing. And I think that you definitely, no one is saying that you have to completely move, all your operations remote, but I do think that employers that don't at least adopt a hybrid approach or really tap into more of that work-life balance that people are seeking, I think that they're
Right.
going to find that their talent pool is going to be much smaller.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Germeen, I thank you so much. This has been so awesome. I know we could sit here and talk about this for forever,
I know.
but we can't. So I have to be respectful of your time. I thank you so much. Again, you guys can follow Germeen on Instagram at The Visionary Accountant, and I will post all her information on the link below for YouTube, and also in my Instagram post, and it'll also be on the podcast information when I post it as well. So
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I will get you over that video, of course, so you can share it with your network. And yeah, it was so fun being here. Again, I can talk about these things till I'm blue in the face.
awesome. And this won't be the last time. I say that with all of my guests. This will not be the last time that you see us together, because I'm big on connections. I'm big on relationships. So I will definitely be reaching back out again, whether it's, a recap or refresh or, something, but we will definitely be getting together again.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Thank you.